Hello, and welcome to Hedgehog Storytime, where I read my weird original fiction. The following story is part of the Mayhem Cerebrum project, linked to the playlist in the description below. Yes, you have to read them all. No, that is not a request. It's here. It's finally here, the story I've been waiting to tell for years, the story that Edie Valley and Daswadani were kind of just prologues to. So, not this one in particular, Mayhem Cerebrum, I mean, this one in particular I've been waiting to tell for quite a while. I've been playing this one for months, but, no, this one's gonna be great. I think this is honestly the best way to bring Mayhem Cerebrum in. I think this is pretty exemplary of what it's gonna be. Especially in its length. I originally anticipated the story being 3 parts long. It is 4 parts and more than 14,000 words. Please kill me now. Anyway, are you ready for more card games? I'm ready for more card games. Let's do it. Here is You Can't Keep a Good Bitch Down, Part 1. Bake had a problem. Okay, Bake had a lot of problems all the time, always, but today he was dealing with a very specific problem. An economic problem. This was his least favorite kind. It had all started a week ago when he'd gotten the news that a strange sort of ship had pulled right up to Discord and parked. Normally, he wouldn't have batted an eye about it, but this ship was at least as large as a fucking aircraft carrier, probably bigger, and glowed as bright as a spotlight on a hangover. So he'd send some people to check it out. The ship was named Bourbon Street, and it was more like the Vegas Strip than any boat. It had restaurants, theaters, and casinos, the gem of which was called the Tombstone. That popular establishment and the whole of Bourbon Street was apparently owned by a demon named Holiday. This was when Bake knew he had a problem. That name. He never could have forgotten it. Back before he'd been gone, Holiday had been some stupid twerp who happened to get lucky and beat him at cards once. Who'd have thunk he would have become such a big shot in his absence? What a pain in the ass. So, now he had another problem on top of everything else. That smug fucking bastard was sapping Discord's nightlife. What with 6th Avenue largely vacant at the moment, this was an issue. Discord lived and died on its nightlife. Again, economic problem, the most fiddly and annoying of quandaries.
Want me to go over there and bash some skulls in?
Jack asked, licking his lips. He'd noticed Bake pondering the situation on his throne, pondering here meaning chain-smoking and being upset about the whole thing. But he sighed.
No,
he said, flicking a cigarette butt halfway across the room.
As fucking hilarious as that would be, that sends the wrong message. You're probably right.
Jack's head dropped an inch.
This isn't a fascist regime, I suppose.
What? No, it tells that dickhead that I had to resort to violence.
I don't get it.
That means he's won! Ugh, this was such a headache. Bake very well couldn't just waltz over there in the flesh. That was beneath him. And no, it wasn't just because he was afraid Holiday would take him for all he was worth. Shut up! What he needed was for someone to go down there and wipe that smug grin off that Dick Cheese's mug. Someone clever. Someone with a fantastic poker face and nerves of steel. Too bad he couldn't think of anyone like that. Well, anyone who was still in Discord, at least. Maybe if he just kept sulking, the problem would go away all on its own. Just maybe. This would all work out exactly how he was hoping it would. If there was one thing that Raina Cullen was the most proud of, it was her office. Not the one at the hospital, that one was plain by necessity, but the room she'd set aside in her brownstone flat on Beacon Hill. That was her baby, right there. Raina was of the belief that you could tell a lot about a person by how they kept their office, and she'd engineered hers accordingly. The walls were painted a dark shade of maroon to match the antique wood of the floor. On the left side was a brick fireplace, its mantel adorned with nicely framed photos of herself, her mom, and her cat. The right wall was where she displayed her doctorate and her several awards. Towards the back was a small bar, stocked mostly with bourbon and tequila, while her desk was situated in the very middle of that room. It was an old antique oak that she'd picked up from an architectural salvage place down by Cambridge, and it had cost her a pretty penny to get it restored. But it had all been worth it, as it held such a certain wisdom and charm to it that you just couldn't get with modern pieces. There wasn't much on it, of course. Raina didn't actually do much work here. Primarily, she used it for consultations with clients, those that had more specific problems that required more care and comfort than the hospital could give, though she often used it to entertain friends or business associates as well. Sometimes she also chose this room to drink in when it was late at night and she was alone. She liked to think it was because it reminded her of everything she'd gained in her short time as a professional, but really it was simply because it was the room with the least amount of windows. She'd been doing that much more often the last 2 years. Raina was trying to break the habit. It had been 2 years, after all. 2 years past the time she'd been allotted. But still, sometimes, in particularly cloudy nights, when the lights of the city glowed eerily and the fog rolled in thick and heavy, she'd find herself hunkered down in the office, a glass of bourbon clutched in her hand, waiting. Waiting for something she hoped would never come. It was the night she promised herself she'd never do this again, that something did. Raina's eyes were closing, and she was finally losing the battle against sleep, huddled deep in her leather office chair, when her eyes briefly fluttered open again. She could have sworn that there had been something, wind, maybe just on the edge of hearing. Still, that wasn't enough to keep her from closing them again. When someone laughed. She shot up in her chair, suddenly wide awake. But the office was exactly as it should be, quiet and still. Maybe she hadn't really heard anything, and the noises were just something that her exhausted brain had made up to scare her. So she took another sip of her drink and tried to relax. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't ignore me," said a voice, and Raina jumped to her feet. She knew that voice. Of course she did. It was a little impossible to forget when it haunted her every waking moment. It was the voice of the demon. It sighed as she turned around wildly. "You won't be able to see me, so don't bother trying." Then how do I know that you're real?" she asked. "If you're not here, I could have just made you up entirely. It's the stress. It's making me hallucinate." "I find it hard to believe that you'd make up your entire life up until now." "What are you talking about?" As the voice chuckled, Raina felt shivers run down her spine. "Don't tell me you've forgotten our deal." Raina was shaking now. This couldn't be happening. Not when she'd finally achieved the life she'd spent years dreaming of, when everything she'd ever wanted was firmly in her grasp. Not when she'd finally convinced herself that that thing that had caused her every dream to come true had just been a nightmare she'd had all those years ago. Desperately, she decided her only option was to play dumb. "I don't remember. It was such a long time ago." "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. Your entire life. Raina Cullen, miracle brain surgeon at the tender age of 27. They say she can perform surgeries previously thought impossible. But just where did she get such steady hands?" Right now, her hands were not steady. They were clenched into fists and shaking. She was slightly surprised to find herself, of all things, angry. This isn't fair," she said. "I have so much more to accomplish." "Hey!" the demon growled. "I gave you an extra 2 years. I'd say that's pretty generous, all things considered." 5 wasn't enough in the first place. "The only person you have to blame is yourself. Or, oh, I see why you're so upset. Did you really think I wouldn't come to collect? That I'd just forget about you and you'd get out of this deal scot-free? Well, tough shit. You might have even gotten away with it if things had shaken out a little differently. Some people just have the worst luck." "Please," Raina gasped as she scooted backwards towards the wall, though she couldn't really be sure where the voice was coming from. "I'll do anything. I just need more time." A large sigh reverberated around the usually dense room. "Every time with the begging. Sorry, Dr. Cullen, but a deal is a deal. The saddest part is that you probably didn't even need my help at all. It might have taken a few more years, but if you just worked hard at your studies, you very well might have become that miracle brain surgeon you always dreamed of. except that you were just so impatient that you needed a shortcut. I feel no sympathy for people like you. No, please wait. But Raina was cut off as, quite of its own accord, her head suddenly jerked skyward. Her mouth stretched open in a silent scream as something used that orifice as an entrance. For a moment, both she and the demon experienced an incredible amount of pain as the flesh struggled to maintain its coherency with two souls inside of it. Then, with an unnerving crack, her body nearly doubled over. It was only after complete stillness, for far too long, that she spasmed once, twice, and something emerged from her forehead. Neither liquid nor gas, but something in the middle. It glowed a sterile white. It was the soul of Raina Cullen. The demon, who had stolen her face, glanced up at it, and then straightened. Blinking a few times, she plucked the soul from her forehead and held it up to examine it, bemused. After a small chuckle, she popped it into her mouth and chewed on it thoughtfully. Ugh, disinfectant. I should have known. She sighed. But there is such an intriguing ego finish. All in all, not bad. Stretching, she wiggled her extremities around for a minute, getting used to the shape. She took one deep breath, then another. That was when she spotted the half-finished glass of bourbon Raina had left on the desk. Excellent choice for washing down a good soul, she must say. The demon downed it in one swig, then shook herself. All right, don't freak out yet, she muttered under her breath, the expression on her face hardening. You've still got some shit to do. Taking stock of Raina's memories, her life, the demon determined that she could wrap up any necessary loose ends in about 48 hours. Once that was done, it was time to head home. Because if anyone thought they could keep Kay from Discord for long, then they had a big storm coming. All right, so Kay had lied. She tended to do that. It actually only took her 36 hours. She'd figured it would be a much more trying process to find someone to take the cat. But here she was with a suitcase full of dollar bills that she could exchange for bones when she arrived at her destination and a brand new body with which to fuck shit up. Raina had been a stellar investment. She'd had about $50,000 in liquid assets for Kay to withdraw, and she was smoking hot on top of that. Her body also felt good to reside in. Natural. It was a body she'd like to stick with for a while, if possible. But, first things first, get back to Discord, get home, then figure out a plan which would enable her to go about her business in the city without being hunted down like a dog. Like she said, she wanted to keep this body. It was a tall order, though that was the thing about big schemes. It was often very easy to break them down into smaller pieces. Like what she could do right this second, which was to create a door. Kay supposed she could have gone through the other, and if she was going to any other place, she might have had to, but she was so familiar with Discord and where it was in the grand scheme of the cosmos that she could just make a door right there. Any door would do, really, so it was with the suitcase in one hand and a backpack slung over her shoulder stuffed full of some of the cooler pieces she'd snatched from Raina's closet that she stood in front of the door leading out of the office. Those less experienced in traversal might need some chalk or something to help them visualize the shapes, but the important part was the shapes themselves. Kay pointed a finger towards the door and drew a series of circular symbols in the air, after which she held her breath, gripped the handle firmly, and pushed it open. Beyond the threshold was not Raina's hallway, but a somewhat dirty alley. The air that blew into the room smelled like cigarette smoke and mold. Smelled like home. Without hesitation, Kay stepped through the door and onto the street beyond. Any other time, Kay would have immediately relaxed upon reemerging at her destination, but that wasn't in the cards for her today. With her new body, it should be fairly easy to slip through the streets unnoticed, as long as she didn't say her name or let anyone get too close, at least. Yet there was always the chance that someone might recognize her. She didn't really know how it worked, but demons had ways of identifying each other, despite constantly changing faces. So she kept her head down and avoided the more crowded streets. This proved to be less of a challenge than she initially expected. It was the early evening, after all. This should be the time when Discord came alive. It bugged her. Just a little. Malachi had been one thing, but if even Baka himself was a less competent leader than she would have been, then would she have some words for someone. Probably herself in the mirror. Where else do you think she came up with all these amazing one-liners? That was something for her to look into later. For now, she'd finally managed to make it to her place. No one in the entirety of the cosmos knew where it was, that is, except for Kay herself, so don't bother asking. All you need to know is that it was nondescript, but certainly not a shithole. Ultimately, that was all that really mattered to her. The door was located in a particularly curvy alley down a set of cracked concrete stairs that led below the street. Garden level, her ass. The door didn't have a key. A lot of them didn't in Discord. It'd be very annoying to have to change the locks every time you had to abandon an old body. It did have a padlock, though. In this case, a shitty bike one. Not the greatest security, but what person would hide anything valuable behind a fucking bike lock? Well, Kay, of course, but no one needed to know that. She quickly plugged in the code, 70337, largely by muscle memory alone, and the sheet metal door creaked open. After replacing the lock on the other side now, Kay closed the door firmly behind her, froze for a second, then certain that she was alone, promptly collapsed against it. It might be very easy to forget that Kay had escaped from Bake's labyrinth less than 2 days ago. She was very good at hiding it, even from herself, but now that she was alone and safe, Kay gave herself 30 seconds to cry. Even so, she did it quietly, just a few stuttering breaths and stray tears that fell from her eyes as she curled up behind the door. It hadn't even been all that surprising, the things she'd seen down there. Psychological torture was the word of the day, and there were a few very specific things that we all know could have gotten under her skin. She really didn't want to think about it anymore. The falling in and out of hallucinations, the regrets that haunted her, the ghost that wouldn't stop following her around down there. Whatever. It wasn't anything she didn't already know she was guilty of. If anything, the most traumatizing part had been being without a body for so long. Some demons didn't mind it. A few actually preferred it, but Kay couldn't stand being without one. It felt wrong, uncomfortable, like being in public without any clothes on. It felt like at any moment her very being would just drift apart and she wouldn't even exist anymore. Without a body, she was out of control. And Kay didn't like being out of control. She opened her eyes and stared down at Raina's hands. There was always a small amount of dysphoria that accompanied a new bodily acquisition, but this time it was really bad. Even if she was clenching them, bringing them to Raina's face, she didn't feel like she was really here. But she was here. Raina Cullen was not here in this flesh anymore. Kay was. These were Kay's hands, Kay's face. She knew why this felt wrong, and her 30 seconds were up anyway. Kay forced herself to her feet and stumbled through her living room towards the toilet in the back. Shutting the door behind her, she opened the cabinet under the sink and immediately found exactly what she was looking for. The leather case was covered in dust, but inside, in perfect condition, were her needles and ink. Lifting up her skirt, Kay located an unblemished spot on her inner thigh and got to work. When she was done, wincing a little from the pain, she had a small indigo crescent moon tattooed there. Now this body was hers. Now she could feel the burn of the new tattoo and know that she was really here. She had done this to every body she'd inhabited. And inevitably, this wouldn't be the last. Though still out of sorts, Kay knew that she had to pull herself together. A little calmer now, she grabbed the discarded backpack and headed for her bedroom. Trying on some of her new acquisitions would make her feel better because goddamn, it felt good to finally have a proper hourglass figure. She never wanted to be a teenager ever again. A few hours later, Kay ventured out to treat herself to a little snack, and that was when she first heard about Bourbon Street. An interloper who was ticking off Bake, huh? Oh yeah. That was definitely something she could use. As they were wont to do, the gears in Kay's brain were already turning. With a little work, she could make this turn out exactly as she was hoping it would.